Okay, welcome to Psych 101, General Psychology. Today, we're still on the chapter on motivation and emotion. And today we're going to talk a little bit about human sexuality, and then we'll get to the part about emotion. So first, a little bit about human sexuality. A little bit of history here. Kinsey, I think his first name was Alfred, but his last name was Kinsey. Someone by the name of Kinsey did a survey back in 1948, and it's called the Kinsey Survey. It's the first important survey of human sexual behavior that we're aware of. It was done in the 40s. I can tell you a little bit about what I know about this. Kinsey basically had to teach a class on human sexuality, and this was back in the 40s in the U.S. And I don't know if you guys can probably guess how things were in the 40s, but people were pretty, let's say, pretty uptight when it came to sex. Kinsey found that there were no books written on the subject. There was no research. He couldn't find anything. So he had to teach this class. So he decided to do his own survey on human sexual behavior. He surveyed his own students, and he did a very long, detailed survey and asked his students about all sorts of things. And when he looked at the results, he found some interesting things. There's a lot of things that he found. You can look it up online, big, long report on what he found. But here are some highlights about what he found about human sexuality, okay, from his students. He found that there's, first of all, a lot of variation when it comes to human sexual behavior. A lot of variation. There are some men and women who don't really care much about sex, don't really care much about having orgasms. It doesn't really matter that much to them. And there are others who care a lot about it, who have multiple orgasms, and they love sex. They want to have it all the time. So what is normal, actually, it was hard to define because there's a lot of variation. He also uncovered that there are myths about human sexuality. And some of these myths still exist today. There's always myths about sex because it's a very kind of a sensitive subject. Some of the myths he uncovered include like myths that excessive masturbation causes physical and mental illness, right? That if you masturbate, you do it a lot, right? You're going to go blind, you're going to go crazy, something like that, right? Myths like that. And I'm sure you guys have heard some of these. You might have seen presented in TV, like when you watch like kids programming. We often don't want kids to know the truth about human sexuality. So there's cartoons, animations about babies being brought by a stork. There's even a movie called Storks that's about that, right? Because children often ask, where do babies come from? And parents might say, oh, the stork brought you, right? That's a myth. I'm not sure anybody believes that today, but there's movies based on it. There's an animation called Storks, and it was a very common thing back then. And still is today, that we don't want to tell little kids where kids really come from, where babies actually come from, because they're not ready to hear that information. So we tell them things like that, the stork brought you, or, the delivery man brought you, or you hatched from an egg or something like that. They don't want to tell you the truth. Okay. I've heard other things that, that if you masturbate, you're going to get hairy palms or something like that, all kinds of weird things like that. There's a lot of myths out there. A lot of misinformation, actually, and things still that even today that people believe. Okay, but those are just some highlights of what he found, and it's important that you know the truth about human sexuality. And I think a lot of you know the truth already because you're adults, but we often want to keep kids in the dark. So there are these myths or these stories that we create to protect them from this sensitive information that we don't want them to know yet. So that's just a little bit about Kinsey. There's actually, I think, a movie based on him. There is called Kinsey that you can look at. I don't know how accurate it is. I haven't seen it myself, but just a little bit of history there. Sex has always been a very touchy, controversial subject. And I'm sure there were people before Kinsey who studied it. Okay. There are entire cultures where they have artwork and all kinds of things devoted to sex, right? There are cultures that have been very open about it. But Kinsey is giving credit for doing the first survey that was scientific that we're aware of. Okay, and that was way back in the 1940s. It was very controversial back then. And then, things changed after that. I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, I think Playboy was started in the 50s. Okay, Playboy magazine, which is, well, still around, I guess, in online form and other things. And we've had a whole sexual revolution now, right? People are in this country are very free and open about sex for the most part. There's still a bunch of people that are very uptight about it, but it's important that you know the truth about this. I encourage you to take a human sexuality course, okay? Human sexuality relates to everything, absolutely everything, okay? I mean, it relates to your health. It relates to your relationships. It relates to politics. It relates to media and TV and advertising. It's related to absolutely everything, human rights issues, all sorts of things, okay? You'd learn a lot more from that class than you realize. You're not just going to learn about the act of sex, but all the things it's related to. It's actually very interesting and much more than you think is involved in that course. Let's talk about some of those things that you might learn in a human sexuality course, but just a few things. Masters and Johnsons in the 1960, 1966, they did some research and they discovered what are known as the stages of sexual arousal. Masters and Johnsons. Tell you a little bit more. What they actually did is they actually recruited participants to participate in their research. It was laboratory research. They actually had people come into the laboratory and they observed them having sex. They observed them masturbating. They checked all sorts of things. They checked for blood flow. They checked for heart rate, all sorts of things. Very invasive research, okay, that not anyone would want to participate in. But they were very surprised at how many people were willing to participate in this research. Because they checked all sorts of things that were things that had to do that were actually invasive. You wouldn't want people watching you having sex or masturbating or measure, how much your penis grows when you get aroused, things like that, or blood flow, to the vagina and things like that. I mean, they inserted things, they looked at things, they measured things, they did all sorts of things, okay? And through their research, they discovered what are known as the stages of sexual arousal. And these are going to be very obvious, by the way. And when I tell you about them, I mean, you know about them already, okay? They're very obvious. The first stage is called the excitement stage, okay? Or the excitement phase, okay? Stage, whatever you want to call it, stage, right? It's just when you get excited, okay? You get turned on. This is what this means, excitement. Your heart rate and your blood pressure increase, right? Your heart rate goes up, your blood pressure increases. That blood pressure, by the way, causes the penis to become erect in the male. So there's more blood flow to the penis, and the penis gets larger and harder and erect. And that's what makes sex possible for the man, right? Otherwise, can't really, insert a penis, right? It gets harder, right? Yeah, that's what actually causes the penis to enlarge and get hard. It's actually blood flow. It's not other things, okay? But some people might call it different things and might think that there's an actual bone down there or something like that. There's no bones, okay? It's just blood flow. Women also getting increased blood pressure, right? The clitoris becomes erect in a woman. The clitoris is this little tiny thing. It kind of looks like a tiny, tiny deformed little penis, okay? It's like the equivalent of a penis in a female. It's a little tiny thing and it becomes erect, okay? Because of increased blood flow. The vaginal canal, right, expands and becomes lubricated. So this is when you get aroused, you get excited, right? You might be kissing, fondling, right? You're making out, something like that. Before you actually start the act of sex, you probably get excited. Or you might be alone, masturbating, watching, a sexy scene in a movie, and you're getting excited. This is what happens, okay? It's pretty obvious. And then you enter the plateau stage. The plateau stage comes next. For women, what you have is further expansion of the vagina, right? It expands a little bit. There's increased blood flow to the labia minora. Yes, the lips of the vagina get a little bit reddish looking because of blood flow. In men, by this time, they have a full erection and they secrete pre-ejaculatory fluid, this little drop of fluid at the head of the penis. It can contain live sperm, okay? So if you're having unprotected sex, you can get pregnant even before ejaculation, even before any before the stage co-ejaculation, right? Because even when the man is fully erect, there could be a blood there. I mean, a drop of fluid there that actually can contain live sperm. Both men and women experience increased muscle tone, blood pressure, right? Yeah, blood pressure goes up even more, right? And there's muscle tone. What that means that at this point in the plateau stage, you're kind of all tense. Your muscles are all tense, almost like you're flexing. To give you a little bit more information about this, to make it obvious for you, if you're engaging in sex with a partner, this is the stage where you're basically going at it, so to speak. You know, you're having sex, and your muscles are all tense. You know, as you do this, it's like you're flexing. Okay, you're not relaxed at all. Okay. In the plateau stage, if you can make this stage last, then sex will last longer, because this is when you kind of want to maintain, for a man, you want to maintain that erection, you want to maintain that heightened state of arousal so you can continue to perform. Okay. If excitement gets too high, we go to the next stage, and then sex will be over soon after that. If arousal goes down, then as a man, you lose your erection. Yes, this is a bit more male-centric than female-centric. It was the 1960s, after all, a lot more sexism back then. But it's called the plateau stage. So this is basically when you're going at it back and forth, basically, and you want to make this stage last. After this comes the stage called climax, also known as orgasm. Okay, so this is when you have an orgasm. It's the highest point of sexual pleasure. For women, it involves rhythmic contractions of the pelvis and uterus, increased muscle tension. So for the women, you have these contractions, and and you get really tense, and you have an orgasm. Okay, hard for me to describe what it's like for a woman. I'm not a woman, but that's what it says. Okay, for a man, it's pretty obvious what happens. For men, there's pelvic contractions, right? Also, kind of there's contractions you can't really control, and there's ejaculation. Semen comes spewing out, basically. And semen contains sperm and other fluids. According to some research, orgasm occurs in about 85% of men during sex and about 65% of women. So men mostly achieve orgasm during sex. About a third of women do not. And that's kind of sad, but yeah, I mean, that's the way sex is, you're going at it, and then when the man orgasms, right after that, he can't go on after that. Sex is over, pretty much, and she may not have gotten there. To give you a little bit of a hint about that, about what needs to happen, well, first of all, it takes women a little bit longer to get turned on. Okay, men can be turned on relatively quickly, and it takes women a little bit longer to get there, to get to orgasm. So if you want to increase the chances of women having an orgasm, okay, what research suggests, this is research-based, is that you need to pay more attention to the clitoris. That's the equivalent of the male penis, okay? Men have a penis, and that's exactly what they use for sex. So they get plenty of stimulation, and they achieve orgasm. Women, well, don't necessarily get direct clitoral stimulation during sex. So you have to pay attention to that, okay? There's many ways that you can pay attention to that, many things you can do. That includes foreplay and things, during sex and things like that. And that will increase the chances that the woman will actually have an orgasm. That is what the research says. That is what you need to do if you want to increase the chances the woman have an orgasm. You need to pay attention to that clitoris. Okay. Won't say much more about that. You guys can use your imagination, right? Let's keep going. There is another stage after climax, after orgasm, and it's called the resolution stage. This is when you return to being unaroused, when you go back to normal. You're no longer turned on during the resolution stage. You return to being unaroused. So the penis goes back to normal size, okay? Because it may have grown a little bit, during excitement, it goes back to normal size. It will shrink, okay? Blood will flow out of the penis, and then the penis won't be so inflated, so to speak, okay? So there's a decrease in blood pressure and muscle tone. Your muscles relax. After you have an orgasm, you go to the resolution stage, your muscles completely relax. It's extremely relaxing, okay? Once you get to this stage, you go back to normal, and if you've had an orgasm, of course, then you'd be very relaxed. But yeah, there's a decrease in muscle tone. Your muscles aren't all flexed anymore, okay? Males have more of what we call the refractory period. a time that's needed before they can orgasm again. See, here's the thing about males. Once they have one orgasm, they have to wait a little bit of time before they can get erect again and have sex again and have another orgasm. That's called a refractory period. For women, that doesn't have to be true. And I'll show you some graphs in a little bit to illustrate that. And yes, I am keeping it, PG, so to speak, right? I'm not showing you any pictures of any of this, right? But here are some graphs, right, to help illustrate what's going on. So Masters and Johnson's conducted laboratory studies of the human sexual response cycle. When they graphed, the level of excitement across time, this is what they found. So let me explain that. Okay, the graph on the left, right, is the one for males. So you can see for males, the orange line there, excitement goes up pretty quickly during the excitement stage, and then it levels off. That's the plateau stage. That's basically when you're having sex, you're going at it. And then the excitement goes up really quickly again. That's orgasm, right? It goes up as high as it can, you orgasm, and then you can see the orange line there goes down. That's resolution. Excitement decreases after that. You go back to normal. And you can see the dotted line in red, right? That takes place at a longer time, meaning that males can have another orgasm, but they have to wait a certain period of time. There's a period of time between the first orgasm, the peak there of the orange graph, and the peak of the red graph. There's a delay there, right? They could have one orgasm, then they have to wait some time before they can have another one, before they can perform again, and then they'll cool off again. If you look at the graph for females on the right, you see that there's a lot more variation. Okay, so we'll start with the orange line first. So you can see women can increase in excitement very quickly, get excited very quickly. They can have an orgasm and then go through resolution very quickly and basically cool off very quickly. Or if we look at the red line for the female graph, females can increase in excitement very quickly. They can plateau, right? Excitement levels off, and then they have an orgasm, and then another one, right? They can have multiple orgasms, and then they cool off quickly. Or what happens about a third of the time, the blue graph there, the blue line for females, excitement can go up very quickly, plateau, they're excited, no orgasm, and then they cool off more slowly. That's what happens about a third of the time. So there can be more variation to the female response cycle. Females can be multi-orgasmic. I read research that says that all females are capable of having multiple orgasms, one after another after another. You can have 2, 3, 4, 5 in a row, depending on how it goes. Or sometimes you have none because you weren't properly stimulated. Or you can have one big one, and that's it. But there's more variation to the female response cycles. Men are all the same, right? They heat up, right? Get excited, plateau, orgasm, resolution. That's it, right? And then they wait another period of time and they can go at it again. The time they have to wait might be, it might be another 15, 20 minutes or so. And maybe they're ready to go again, depending on the male and how healthy and young they are, how sexually active they are. Or it might be that they have to wait hours, days, weeks, depending, right, on the male. Some might have to wait days. If you're older, it might take longer than that. It depends. But for young males, I mean, we're talking about, minutes, right? It doesn't have to be that long. It could be 15, 20 minutes, a break or something, and then they can go at it again, assuming they want to, okay? Assuming the environment is stimulating enough, right? And, they want to keep going. All right, so those are Masters and Johnson stages of sexual arousal. You need to know them, and they'll be pretty obvious on the exam, okay? Now let's talk about sexual attitudes and behavior. Never mind all that biological stuff, right? There's also a lot of things that have to do with attitudes, what we believe about sex and what we know about sex when we do research and we ask people what they think, okay? First, before I tell you a little bit about that, I want to point out, though, that first bullet point there, that sexual activity continues throughout the lifespan, okay? What does that mean? What that really means is that old people have sex too, okay? You don't just stop having sex, when you get older, okay? Sexual activity continues. I'm sorry to tell you guys, but mom, dad, grandpa, grandma, if they have a partner, they're probably doing it. That's just reality. That's what happens. They don't want to tell you. They don't want you to see, right? to find out. But that's a normal part of human behavior, right? But yeah, once you become sexually active, you know, hopefully closer to the age of 18, right? Or you're an adult, hopefully, right? But I know that the average is around 16 for Americans. You know, it continues. You know, sometimes you know, it can be frequent, right? You have a partner and then you break up, maybe, you know, might not have sex for a while, months, years, it depends, right? But it will continue, right? You'll have sex when you're a teenager, probably, right? And maybe hopefully in your later teens, or maybe in your 20s, you know, 30s, 40s, and it continues, okay? It's not true. It is a myth, another myth, right? That old people don't have sex, right? That is a myth. I'm sorry to tell you, they do, and they enjoy it just as much as young people. Okay, I know you don't want to think about that, but that's the truth, okay? There's another survey that showed that 83% of men and 66% of women reported they had sex at least once in the last year. And this, of course, would be adult men and women. There's a problem with those statistics, of course. The numbers are much higher for men than they are for women, okay? Here's the thing. Most men are having sex with one woman and vice versa. There are people who prefer the same sex, and we'll talk about that a little bit, but those numbers should be a lot closer together. Why the differences? Might have something to do with the fact that women often will not want to admit that they had sex, right? Because it's not as socially acceptable for women to say they're having sex as it is for men, right? For men, it's a big deal, right? It's like, yeah, you're a man, you're supposed to have sex. You're a woman. It's like, if you're not married, you're not supposed to be having sex, but a lot of women are, and a lot of them will not admit it. So those numbers should be closer together. Could be that men are exaggerating, women are not admitting it, all sorts of things. And that has to do with the way we're raised. Men are raised to basically want sex and pursue sex. Women, on the other hand, are raised differently. They're taught not to want sex too much, to wait until they're married, although most can't wait that long, you know, and that not to have a lot of partners. So they're taught that sex is a bad thing, and men are told totally different things. If you're a teenager, right, and you're getting to that age, what'll probably happen when parents start learning that, find out that you're sexually active, this is what's going to happen. If you're a woman, they're probably going to yell at you and get mad at you, right? The hell you doing, right? You know what could happen. You're going to get pregnant, you're going to get disease. That's what they're going to tell you probably as a woman. If you're a man, you're a teenager, right? They find out you're having sex. Your dad's probably going to take you aside and say, son, right, you're growing up, right? This is normal. Please protect yourself, right? Use some condoms, right? Very different speech you're going to get if you're a man. And that's the reality. And I've heard it from my own students. I'm not making this up, right? Very different attitudes when it comes to sex for men and women. And these attitudes are reflected in other research. Other research has found, for instance, that men are more interested and think about sex more often. Men think about sex often, and they're more interested in sex than women in comparison, by the way. Again, we have to ask ourselves, is it the case that men really want sex more often? They think about it more often? Or is it just that women aren't admitting it? Or does it reflect the, you know, what we're taught about sex, that men should pursue sex and that women should deny sex, okay? It could reflect different things, but there is something, these are surveys for the most part, it probably has something to do with honesty for sure. Men are more interested in the physical aspect of sex. When it comes to sex, what do men want? They want what actually counts as sex, okay? Penetration, right? That's what men want. Never mind all that other stuff, right? All the talking and the foreplay and stuff. They want to get right down to business, okay? Women, on the other hand, want to take their time a little bit more and care about other things that are kind of involved with sex. Men just want to get right to the point. Okay, that's what the research shows. Men have more permissive attitudes about sex, okay, than women. Men are more likely to sleep with a stranger, someone they just met, more likely to have sex with their friends or want to have sex with their friends. They're just more permissive about sex. They want sex sooner in a dating relationship as well. If you're dating a man, as a woman, what you'll probably find is that he keeps pressuring you. He wants it, right? And he keeps insinuating or pressuring you or something like that. And you kind of have to like beat him off with a stick. Not yet, not yet. I don't know you that well. I'm not ready, right? And you got to hold him off as long as you can. You stay together long enough, you're probably going to end up doing it. But he's usually, wanting that and doing something to get that all along the way. He's trying to get there, right? Whereas the woman is trying to hold him off, right? So it doesn't happen too soon. You give it to him the first night, he'll take it, trust me, for the most part, right? He probably won't respect you for it, but he'll take it, okay? Very big differences when it comes to men and women as far as how they approach sex and what they believe about sex. But we're living in the same reality, okay? Attitudes should be more similar. There could be an issue here with honesty. Maybe women just don't want to admit that they like sex and think about sex as much as men. Or maybe men really are just more horny and more interested in sex than women because of how they're raised and because of their biology, by the way. Men have higher levels of testosterone, and testosterone has been directly linked to increasing sexual thoughts and sexual desire. Women have a lot less testosterone. So there's biological and social explanations for this. There's other research that is a bit more serious that talks about why these differences may exist. Why do men and women have such different attitudes when it comes to sex? It's related to several things. One thing that it's related to, and I want to make sure that I'm not going too slow. One thing it's related to is parental investment. Okay, parental investment has to do with the time and effort men and women devote to parenting. It differs, right? Who devotes more time, more effort to parenting? It's always women. They're the ones who get pregnant. They're the ones who have to give birth. They're the ones who have to breastfeed. And even beyond that, they do most of the work when it comes to raising children. Men could help out, but they're usually not as adequate. They usually don't do as good of a job. They're not equipped as well as women to handle children. Even when it comes to sex itself, the sperm is hundreds of times smaller than the ovum, basically the egg that the female produces, the unfertilized egg. Okay, so even there, men are contributing less. Usually, the time men devote to parenting usually boils down to the time and effort needed to have sex, and after that, women pretty much have all the costs. He helps out here and there, but he doesn't really do that much. So, in other words, sex has a lot more risk for women. They can get pregnant, right? And if they do, then they're going to have to raise a child, and it's going to cost them a lot of time, a lot of effort, and it also costs a lot of money to raise children, okay? And this will affect mating strategies. Because women have more cost and have to engage in more effort when it comes to raising kids, because that's what sex has to do with after all. You may not be thinking about having kids when you're having sex, but biologically, that's what it's for. And we are, I think, programmed to behave in a certain way because of that. Pregnancy and child rearing is difficult for women. And therefore, according to this theory, according to this research, that's why women are going to be a lot more careful when it comes to sex. They're not going to be so permissive. It's not like anytime, anyone, right, anywhere. That it's not going to be like that, okay? It's going to be, they need to find a good man that they know, right, someone they can trust, and maybe then it's okay. Someone who's going to stick by them, right, who's a good worker and caring and all those things, right, smart, right? Women care about a lot of things, right? Men, on the other hand, are very permissive when it comes to sex, like I said, right? Because it doesn't cost them a lot. It's not a lot of effort for men, right? They don't get pregnant, they don't breastfeed, they don't do most of the child rearing. So for them, they can be like, hey, why not, right? Anytime, right? Anywhere, with just about anyone, pretty much. Not all men are that bad, but trust me, men have a pretty low bar when it comes to sex. The woman doesn't have to be smart. She doesn't have to be a good person. They basically care about getting sex. If she's good looking enough, that's pretty much all that matters. Okay. And if they're really super horny, it doesn't even matter that much either. Okay. Very different attitudes when it comes to sex. And according to this research, it has to do with parenting. Women just have it harder, and therefore women have to be more careful, and they can't just be giving it up randomly. Okay. Men wish it was like that, but no, it can't be that way for women. Women who basically, by the way, are easy, so to speak, who are not too choosy, not too careful. Society doesn't think very well of those women. You know who those women are. You've seen them. You know what you call them, right? There's derogatory names for them. Not saying that's right or appropriate, but society doesn't view those women very well. Men, on the other hand, who sleep around and have lots of sex partners, stuff like that, they're not viewed negatively at all, right? And there's a reason for that, okay? And according to this research, it has to do with parental investment. Another reason why sexual attitudes of men and women differ is because of what we call fidelity. Fidelity really means loyalty, okay? So here's the thing. Research shows that men are very concerned about sexual fidelity, okay? So here's the thing. Let me tell you about this research. Men and women were asked, what would upset you more? Finding out that your partner is having sex with somebody else, or finding out that your partner has fallen in love with somebody else? Men are much more concerned about sexual fidelity. So for men, the worst thing for them was finding out that their woman, right, their partner, we're mostly talking about heterosexual relationships here, right? But that their partner has been having sex with somebody else. They are very jealous about that. They want to make sure that their partner is sexually loyal to them. They care about sexual fidelity. Why is that? According to research, it's because men want to make sure that the children they are actually raising are their own. When men have children, when they become fathers, they want to make sure that those children that they're helping out with, providing resources, right, they're helping out with, are actually their children. That's why they're so jealous about sex. The sad truth about men is that they can never be completely certain, short of some DNA test, that the children they're raising are actually their own. A lot of men are actually raising somebody else's kids and don't even know it. Right? They had sex with the woman, right? They were there at the hospital. The child was born. They think it's theirs. For some of them, it turns out that she had sex with somebody else somewhere in between, and it's not his child. There's about 5 to 10% of men to whom that happens to. They have no idea they're raising somebody else's child. They may even look like you, and it might still not be yours. Because, you know, children can look all sorts of ways. They might look more like the mother, or you think they look like you, and they really don't. Right? So men are very jealous about sex. That's why they're very jealous in general. If you're with a man, right, you're having sex with a man, you're in a relationship with a man, they're going to be usually very jealous. They don't want you talking to other men, hanging out with other men. Forget about going out with your male friends, right, or things like that. They're usually very jealous about that stuff, and it's for a very good reason. It's like they're very protective. They want to make sure nobody else gets a chance other than them to have sex with you. So they want to make sure that they maximize their chances that when they do have children, that those children are theirs, okay? For women, it's different. Women care more about emotional fidelity. When women were asked, what would upset you more? Finding out your partner, your man, for instance, has having sex with another woman, or finding out that your man is in love with another woman. They were more jealous of when it comes to finding out that their partner, their man, for instance, is in love with another woman. So they care more about emotional fidelity. They care more about the love. They do care about the sex, but they care more about love, according to the research. Why do they care more about emotional fidelity, about love? According to research, it's because women want to know that their man is committed to them, right? As a woman, you get pregnant, you have kids, you want to make sure you have a good man who's going to stick by you and your kids and help out. You want someone who's kind, right? Who's generous, who's smart, all sorts of things. You usually have a long list as a woman of the kind of man you want, because you want emotional fidelity. You want someone who's going to love you and stick by you. That's what's important for raising kids. Women do care about sex, don't get me wrong, but they are less concerned, less jealous if the man has sex with another woman. That doesn't mean she'll forgive him, but she often will. And it's as if men instinctively know this, because when a man is caught cheating, he's caught having sex with another woman, he usually gives a very good excuse that all men know, all women have heard about it, either from their man or maybe from somebody else. They've all heard it, right? The excuse that men give when they're caught having sex with another woman, right? They're caught cheating. They almost always will give this excuse. They will almost always say, I don't love her. I only love you. It was just sex. It's like they instinctively know that women care more about love than sex. But if you are a woman and you're caught cheating, having sex with another man, and you say, I don't love him, it was just sex, that is not going to help you at all. That will make it worse. Men are actually so jealous when it comes to sex that if he finds out you're having sex with another man, you better run, okay? So many men will get physically violent, will get crazy. It drives them mad. How upsetting is it for a man to find out, and I'm talking about where they catch their woman in the act. If they find out, you know, and they don't catch it, but they just find out you've been cheating on them, they're gonna be very upset, of course. But if they catch you in the act, I'm saying you better run. He's gonna try to beat the crap out of you and that guy. You better hope he doesn't have a gun, because that's how angry men get. And I'll tell you a little bit of history about this, how upsetting this is to a man to find out that their woman has been having sex with another man, to catch them in the act. You guys have heard of probably the insanity plea, how people can plead insanity in court and therefore not go to jail, not go to prison, right? That actually comes from a situation that has to do with sex. Hundreds of years ago, I don't remember the year, a man basically caught his wife having sex with another man. He got really upset, of course. So he went and got his gun and shot them both dead. This was a man who was probably well-to-do, could afford a good lawyer. So he got himself a good lawyer, right? Pleaded insanity. And, you know, he got off without any prison time, without any jail time, because his lawyers argued that he was so upset by finding his woman having sex with another man that it drove him temporarily insane and he couldn't help himself. That's where the insanity plea comes from. But I'm telling you guys that is how upsetting it is for a man to find out that a man has been having sex with another woman. It will drive him mad, right? You better make sure he doesn't find you in the act, because it's very, very upsetting, okay? If you have a good man, maybe he'll just get upset and run away crying or something like that. But if you have like a usual, typical kind of man, he's gonna try to do something, okay? Be careful is what I'm saying. But that's what research says about fidelity when it comes to loyalty. Men care about sex, a whole lot about sex, right? Men care more about, women care more about love. They do care about sex, but they will often forgive a man for having sex with another woman if he makes a good excuse, if he knows how to talk his way out of it, right? Men, on the other hand, are less likely to forgive a woman for having sex with a man. Okay, that's what they care about. Let's keep going. Let's talk about homosexuality, because it's been coming up a little bit here and there. What about those people who prefer to have sex with the same sex, right? Men with men, women with women. There's about 2.8% of men, about 1.4% of women who consider themselves homosexual. The percentages for women are a little bit less, because a lot of women don't like the term homosexual. They prefer the term lesbian or something else, okay? But yeah, there's a small percentage of men and women who like to have sex with the same kind, so to speak. Men with men, women with women. And when it comes to homosexuality, the attitudes have varied throughout history. The early Greeks and Romans accepted and maybe even celebrated homosexuality. They were aware of it and it was normal for them, especially for the upper class. As a matter of fact, I think for the Greeks, it was considered a sign of status if an older man could seduce a young boy, right? That's like pedophilia, right? It's against the law. But for them, all that was acceptable. Older, wealthier men can do whatever they wanted. And if they were homosexual and they wanted to seduce a young boy, that was considered a sign of status, that they had so much status, so much wealth, that they could seduce a young boy, right? So they accepted it, they were aware of it. Later Europeans considered homosexuality sinful, right? They executed people, they stoned people, and they still do that in some countries, by the way. Not so much in European countries, but in other countries in the Middle East, they'll kill you if you tell them you're homosexual or that you're attracted to the same sex. It is still very dangerous in some countries. But for the most part, the more developed world has kind of moved on, okay? In the early 20th century, homosexuality was considered a disease, a sign of mental illness. Here in the US, it was considered a disease, sign of mental illness. And it wasn't that long ago that they provided therapy for those that were homosexual, so to speak. And they tried to convert them, tried to make them heterosexual. And there are some places in the country where they still try to do those things. And you know what that is? That is actually a very, very bad, horrible form of therapy. Okay, I can tell you some horrible stories. Now, for some religious-based therapies, I mean, it involves a lot of praying and things like that, and you pray to God and things like that, and supposedly you can get healed and become heterosexual. I think it's just denial. Okay, there are people who claim that they've been healed, right? They're just in denial. They're still homosexual. They may be with a woman and be married and have kids, but they still are attracted to men, for instance, right? It's who you're attracted to that makes you homosexual, right? You can decide to have sex with the opposite sex. That doesn't mean that you're not homosexual. There's plenty of people out there who are homosexual, who are in denial, and will try to have a heterosexual relationship because they're in denial or they don't want to admit it. And usually what happens later on, they'll accept who they really are and they'll stop that and they'll know that they prefer the same sex. Same thing with those who have claimed that they've been healed. They're probably just in denial and they're still homosexual. But I've seen documentaries and things like that. I've heard of people who've claimed to have been healed, but no, you don't change people's sexuality. Okay. It's who they are. Just like can't change someone from, they're born male, female, that could be somewhere in between, but you can't really change that. It's a matter of biology. We'll find out in a moment. But yes, it was considered a sign of disease and mental illness, okay? And if you find an early version of the American Psychological Association, I don't know what version it would be, if it was the first version, but right now we're on the 5th revised, probably gonna have the 6th soon. You can find homosexuality there in some early versions as a mental illness. No longer is it considered a mental illness. Nowadays, of course, homosexuality is something to be accepted, something to be embraced if that's who you are, right? Times have changed. A lot of people still don't accept people who are homosexual and want to deny their rights, want to restrict their freedoms, right? You know who those people are, right? You've heard about them. It's not right, okay? Times have changed and we're no longer that discriminatory, right? We're getting more tolerant as a society of people, no matter how they differ, okay? But let's keep going. What actually causes homosexuality? I have it there for you in bold. Research data suggests that to a significant extent, sexual orientation is something which we are born. It's not a choice. If you're heterosexual and if you're a man attracted to women, women attracted to a man, that is a matter of biology. And it is the same thing for those who are attracted to, the same sex. Men attracted to men, women attracted to women. They couldn't help it either. It's how they are. If you believe that homosexuality is a choice, then ask yourself, if you're a heterosexual, ask yourself, if you believe it's a choice, then that means you can choose to also be homosexual. Do you believe that? If you don't, then you shouldn't believe it for them either. Okay? There's not different rules for you than for them. Okay? It's the same thing. It's biology, for the most part, that determines who you're attracted to. It determines whether you're male, female, somewhere in between. It also determines who you're attracted to. Now, there are people who are attracted to the same sex, by the way. I mean, to the same sex, to both sexes, who are called bisexual. There's a lot of variation when it comes to human sexuality in general, okay? It's not the way we've been taught in the past. It's not strictly one or the other. There's a lot of in between, okay? Sexual orientation is not something that can be changed. Okay, it's not something that you can change. It's who you are. It's not just about your body, it's also about your brain. Can you change the way your brain is wired? Right? The way your brain developed? No, you cannot. We are not that advanced as a species to be able to go in there and change people's brains so that they're not homosexual. That has a lot to do with not just the biology, but also the physical body, but also the brain. Okay? Genetic factors account for 50 to 60% of homosexuality. That means if one identical twin is gay, there's a 50 to 60% chance the other one will also be gay. They share 100% of the DNA, right? Some of you might be thinking, okay, the other 40, 50% is then the environment, right? That means that it's a choice. That means that somebody seduced them. No, that's not what it means. The other environmental factor that is missing, right? Because there's genetic factors and environmental factors. The environmental factors are actually hormones. While you're in your mother's womb, while you are developing prenatally. If you're a female, when you're in your mother's womb, right? Female fetus, embryo, let's say, right? And you're exposed to too many male hormones, you could develop male tendencies. If you're male and you are exposed to too much female hormone, you could develop female tendencies because these hormones will alter the developing brain. So these prenatal hormone levels are the environmental factors. It's not the environment outside the womb, it's the environment inside the womb. They influence brain development. There's actually a part of the brain called the anterior hypothalamus region that is 2 times larger in heterosexual men than homosexual men. In homosexual men, this part of the brain is exactly the same size as it is in women. Their brains are more like women. And that's just one thing. There's a whole bunch of research, a whole bunch of different brain areas, a whole bunch of different things that tell us it's all biology. People don't wake up one day and decide, you know what, I think I'm going to be gay. That's not the way it works, okay? It's something that is a part of them. That's who they are. Now, I know there's people who still don't believe this. Most people now believe this and are aware of this, right? But there are still a lot of people out there who refuse to believe the research, refuse to believe the truth, right? Say it's all fake, right? Whatever it is, because there's all this talk about fake news and fake science, stuff like that. No, those people are basically just don't want to listen to something that doesn't agree with them. Those people are being emotional and not logical, okay? There's a reason we have education, there's research, right? So we can actually know the truth about things, so we're not deceived, right, by old-fashioned ways of thinking or myths or just things that are just outright, you know, discriminatory, okay? We need to know better, and the research is clear on this, okay? Let's keep going. Let's now talk about something less interesting. Let's talk about emotion, okay? So I know this is kind of like a big letdown, okay? We just talked about sex, very interesting. Now we got to talk about emotion. Okay, yes, it's called motivation and emotion, okay? This is the emotion part. According to your book, there are 7 universal facial expressions of emotion. There's like 7 emotions that we can all recognize, right? There's happiness, surprise, sadness, fright, disgust, contempt, and anger. I don't like this research, but I'm presenting it because it's what's in your book. However, I will tell you, as a lot of you already know, there are 5 basic emotions, and you know what they are. If you watch that movie Inside Out, or the animation Inside Out, right? Yes, there's joy, right? Which is the same thing as happiness. There is sadness, right? There is fear. There is anger. And I believe the other one is disgust, if I'm remembering correctly. But there's 5 basic emotions, okay? Surprise is different, more complicated. Contempt is a more complicated emotion. But yes, happiness, sadness, fright would be fear, right? Disgust and anger. Those are the 5 basic emotions, okay? But your book added another 2 that are a little bit more evolved, more complicated. But what we need to know is, where do emotions come from? Okay, it's actually not an easy question to answer. What gives rise to emotions? Okay, the James Lang theory of emotion says that there are external stimuli that trigger specific patterns of arousal and action. The important thing here that the theory says is that there are distinct patterns. There's a distinct physiological response for each emotion. Each emotion has a physical response within the body. So anger has a certain physical response. Sadness has a different one. Happiness has a different one. Different emotions have different physical patterns within the body. So an example would be, you see a snake, right? You see a snake, your heart races, right? Heart rate goes up, adrenaline kicks in, right? And these physical responses trigger the specific emotion. So the physical responses within the body give you the specific emotion. That's what this theory says. There's a specific pattern of arousal, a specific physical response for each emotion. That's what this theory says. It's actually simple. It just sounds complicated, right? And that's the way your book describes it. But I explained that it's actually very simple. Another theory, the Cannon-Barr theory of emotion, says that an event simultaneously triggers bodily responses and the experience of the emotion. It basically says that emotions accompany bodily responses. The emotions occur at the same time as the physical reactions. They don't cause each other, like the James Lang theory says, okay? For example, you see a snake, right? Your heart races, okay? Adrenaline kicks in, those are the physical responses, and then you experience fear at the same time. The physical responses and the fear occur at the same time. the physical responses don't cause the emotion. The James Lange theory says the physical responses cause the emotion. This theory simply says that the physical responses and the emotion occur at the same time. And then this theory, the Schachter-Singer theory of emotion, is the one that's a little bit more complicated and that there's more support for. It says that emotions reflect arousal and the appraisal of the situation. Okay? The way we label our emotions depends on our appraisal of the situation. I'm going to have to explain this one a little bit further. But this is what happens, okay? You see an example. You see a snake, right? Your heart races, adrenaline kicks in. Those are the physical responses. And then you interpret the situation as fear. So what this theory says is that when you experience an event, let's say an event that causes fear, right? And you experience an event, what happens is you get the physical responses within the body, right? And then you interpret the situation as something dangerous. And your interpretation of the event along with the physical response is what gives you the emotion. So for instance, I'll give you a different example. If you see a snake, your heart races, adrenaline kicks in, but then you think of the situation as, oh, this snake is cool. Look at how colorful it is, right? You interpret the situation as not one that's scary, not one that's dangerous, but one that is interesting because you like snakes, for instance, you think they're cool. In that case, you will experience excitement rather than fear. So the way you label the situation and your physical response to the situation, together, those two combine to give you the emotion. And here's a flow chart of how it works. That'll make it a little bit more clear for you. So you see a snake, right? And I guess that's you right there, right? That's supposed to be a person, right? Who is experiencing fear. He's obviously acting and not doing a very good job. It doesn't look fearful. It looks more like he has to go to the bathroom or something like that. But let's say he's expressing fear. Okay. The James Lange theory says that basically you see a snake, right? That's the arousing situation, right? And then that causes your heart to pound, sweating, shaking, that kind of stuff. That's a physical response. And that physical response leads directly to the emotion, directly to the fear. The Cannon-Barr theory says that, you know, you see a snake, right? That's the arousing situation. That leads to your heart pounding, sweating, shaking, that kind of stuff, and the fear at the same time. The two things, the physical response and the emotion, don't cause each other. They occur together, though. And the Schachter-Singer two-factor theory of emotion says that you see a snake, right? That's the arousing situation that causes the heart to pound, to, the sweating, the shaking, that kind of stuff. And then the cognitive label, your thought, I'm scared, I'm going to die, right? It's going to bite me. Those two things together will combine to give you the emotion of fear. That's the Schachter-Singer theory, two-factor theory of emotion. And the last slide is just references that we cited. Okay, so we will stop there.